The night I wired $50,000 to my husband's parents, I realized something was deeply wrong. Not with them, but with me. If you're here for stories about quiet revenge, family betrayal, and the moment a woman finally stops explaining herself, stay with me. Like, comment, subscribe if this connects. Now let me tell you how this began. I'm Natalie Brooks. I was 32 years old when my marriage officially stopped being a partnership and became a system of extraction. I didn't know that word yet. I only knew the feeling. The transfer confirmation blinked on my laptop screen. Amount: $50,000. Recipient: Harold and Diane Whitman. Memo line: family support. Family, not mine. My husband, Evan Whitman, stood behind me in the apartment kitchen, arms crossed, watching like a supervisor. He didn't touch me. He didn't need to. The pressure was already internalized. Good, he said. That should calm them down for a while. For a while, as if this were medication. I closed my laptop slowly. My hands were steady. That would come later, the shaking. In private. At the time, I was a senior editorial manager at a mid-sized publishing house in Chicago. I oversaw 12 editors, managed acquisition schedules, negotiated contracts with authors who trusted me to protect their work. My annual compensation that year was $178,000, before bonuses. That number mattered to Evan's parents, more than my name ever did. Harold Whitman liked to say, editors were just failed writers who learned to exploit talent instead. Diane Whitman preferred not to speak to me directly at all. She addressed comments to Evan, even when they were about me. Natalie should be grateful, she once said at dinner, staring into her wine. Some women would kill for a husband who knows how to manage money. Evan nodded, like a student agreeing with a professor. That was 6 months into our marriage. The first time money came up, it sounded temporary. It was a Sunday afternoon. Evan's parents invited us to their house in Naperville. Large, immaculate, cold, in that way homes get when love is conditional. After dessert, Harold leaned back in his chair and sighed theatrically. The market hasn't been kind, he said. Our investments are tighter than expected. Diane dabbed her lips. We raised Evan well, gave him everything. Private schools, tutors. We didn't think we'd be worrying about money at this stage of life. Evan reached for my hand under the table. His grip tightened slightly. We thought, Harold continued, eyes sliding toward me, that family helps family. I didn't answer. No one had asked me anything yet. Evan cleared his throat. Natalie does well, really well. And it's not like it would hurt us. There it was. Not a question, a conclusion. I remember thinking it would be rude to say no in front of them. I told myself we'd discuss it later. I told myself this was a one-time thing. That night, Evan didn't discuss it. He told me what we were doing. $50,000, he said casually, like we were talking about groceries. Monthly, at least for now. I laughed. I actually laughed. That's not a thing, I said. You don't just give your parents $600,000 a year. He didn't laugh back. They supported me my whole life, he said. This is repayment. I didn't marry your debt, I said. His face changed then. Not angry, disappointed. Like I'd failed a test I didn't know I was taking. Don't be selfish, he said. You're good at making money. That's your role. That sentence stayed with me. Your role. The first transfer happened the following week. Evan stood next to me while I did it. He insisted. Said it was easier if I handled it, since my accounts were more liquid. After that, it became routine. The money left my account on the first of every month. No thank you. No acknowledgement. Just expectations. When I hesitated the second month, Evan didn't argue. He escalated. He slammed a cabinet door, hard enough to crack the hinge. He grabbed my wrist once, not enough to bruise, just enough to remind me that resistance had consequences. Do you want to embarrass me in front of my parents? He asked quietly. That was how it worked. No screaming, no visible violence, just pressure, isolation, and the constant suggestion that I was the problem. My own parents thought I was lucky. You married up, my mother said once. Don't rock the boat. So I didn't. I rocked nothing. I adjusted my budget, cut back, delayed things I wanted, justified it as temporary. But the amounts grew. $50,000 became non-negotiable. Then came emergencies, a property tax issue, a legal misunderstanding. A business opportunity Harold didn't want to miss. Each one arrived with a look, a pause, a reminder of my role. By the third month, I had started keeping records, not because I planned to do anything, because something in me knew I might need proof someday. I didn't know yet what I was preparing for. I only knew this wasn't support. It was control. And the most dangerous part wasn't the money. It was how quietly I was disappearing, while everyone around me called it generosity. The night I sent that first transfer, Evan kissed my forehead and said, "See? This is why my parents like you." I watched the confirmation email fade from my screen, and I understood, for the first time, that liking me was conditional. That was the smallest moment, the one that seemed harmless, the one that started everything. And if I had known where it would end, I still wouldn't have screamed. I would have stayed just as calm, because calm is what lets you see clearly, and clarity is what makes revenge possible. By the fourth transfer, no one pretended it was temporary anymore. Evan Whitman started calling it an obligation, not to me, to his parents. The rules were never written down. They didn't need to be. They were enforced through tone, timing, and silence. Rule 1. Money left my account before any discussion about our own plans. Rule 2. If Harold or Diane Whitman were unhappy, Evan was unhappy. And if Evan was unhappy, I paid for it in ways that never left marks. Rule 3. Nothing was ever enough. I learned the rules slowly, the way people do when they're trying to survive something they haven't named yet. The first time I broke one, it was accidental. I had had a long day at work. An author threatened to pull a manuscript unless we renegotiated distribution rights. I stayed late, took calls, did my job well. I came home mentally exhausted, not scared. Evan was sitting at the kitchen table when I walked in. Harold Whitman was on speakerphone. "You're late," Evan said. I didn't apologize fast enough. "We were just talking about the transfer," Harold said, voice smooth. "It hasn't gone through yet." "It will," I said. "I haven't had a chance to." There was a pause on the line, the kind that's meant to make you fill it. "Natalie," Diane Whitman said, suddenly joining the call. "We need to feel secure." I felt something tighten in my chest. "I'll send it tonight," I said. "Good," Evan said. "See how easy that was?" After he hung up, he stood too close, not touching, just enough that I could smell his cologne. "You don't make them wait," he said. "You don't make me look weak." "I didn't mean to," I replied. "That's worse," he said calmly. "It means you don't think." That night, he slept in the bed. I didn't. I lay awake on the couch, staring at the ceiling, listening to the refrigerator hum, trying to understand how my life had become this quiet, controlled thing, without a single dramatic moment to point to. At work, I was thriving. That contrast was disorienting. I negotiated a 6-figure advance for a debut novelist. I mentored junior editors. I was trusted with sensitive contracts because I was known for precision and discretion. People listened to me. Then I went home and asked permission to breathe. The next escalation came disguised as concern. Diane Whitman called me directly for the first time. "Natalie," she said, voice syrupy, "we worry about you." I held the phone between my shoulder and ear while sorting laundry. Evan was out. "About what?" I asked. "You work so much," she continued. "Stress can make women unstable." I didn't respond. "We just want to make sure Evan isn't carrying too much on his shoulders," she added. There it was again. The implication that my success was a burden, that my competence needed supervision. "You're very lucky," she said. "Not all husbands would tolerate a wife who thinks she's in charge." That night, Evan asked to see my bank statements. Not suggested. Asked. "I need to know what's going on," he said. "You've been distracted." "I manage my finances," I replied. He stared at me, long enough that I felt 12 years old. "We're married," he said. "There shouldn't be secrets." He took my laptop from my hands. I let him. That was the moment I still think about. Not because I couldn't have stopped him, because I didn't. He scrolled, asked questions, made notes, calculated. "You can afford more," he concluded. "No," I said quietly. That was the first time I said it. He didn't raise his voice. He leaned down until his face was level with mine. "Do you want to embarrass me again?" he asked. I shook my head. "Then don't argue." After that, the money wasn't the only thing they took. They took time. They took decisions. They took my right to say no without consequence. Harold Whitman started referring to me as our investment at family gatherings. Diane talked about my income like it was communal property. Evan corrected me in front of them if I spoke too much. He interrupted if I laughed too loudly. He told me what to wear to dinners. Nothing that looks expensive, he said once. It sends the wrong message. The irony didn't escape me. I stopped inviting friends over. Stopped mentioning work wins. Stopped calling my own parents. Because they always said the same thing. Marriage requires compromise. Try harder. Don't provoke him. I learned how to move through my own life quietly. But I also learned something else. Evan didn't know how much I noticed. I noticed how Diane always waited for Evan to approve before smiling at me. I noticed how Harold's stories about financial hardship didn't match public records. I noticed how Evan never touched the money once it left my account. He was a courier, not a provider. And slowly, without telling anyone, I started preparing. I opened a separate account in my name only. I copied every transfer, every email, every text. I didn't frame it as revenge. I framed it as insurance. Because somewhere between the 5th and 6th transfer, something shifted inside me. Not anger, clarity. I stopped believing this was about family support. It was about power. And the moment you understand that, you stop asking when it will end. You start asking how. The answer wouldn't come yet, but it was coming. And when it did, it wouldn't be loud. It would be precise. Because people who underestimate quiet women never hear the door close until it's already locked behind them. The dinner invitation arrived by text. Sunday, 7 o'clock. Dress nice. No greeting. No explanation. Evan Whitman sent it while I was in a meeting negotiating foreign rights for a nonfiction title. I stared at the message longer than necessary, then locked my phone and finished my work without missing a beat. That was the version of me they never saw. At 7 on Sunday, I walked into Harold and Diane Whitman's house carrying a bottle of wine I knew they wouldn't drink. Harold liked to remind people he preferred serious vintages, as if taste were a moral category. Diane took the bottle from my hands without a thank you and disappeared into the kitchen. Evan squeezed my elbow. Not hard. A reminder. "We're all here," Harold said from the dining room. "Let's sit." I noticed an extra place setting. That was the first signal. The second was the man already seated at the table, flipping through his phone like he owned the room. "This is Leonard Price," Harold said, gesturing. "Our financial advisor." Leonard Price looked up and smiled, like he'd already reviewed my file. "Pleasure," he said. "I've heard a lot." I hadn't. Dinner proceeded as usual. Harold talked about market instability. Diane complained about maintenance costs. Evan nodded at all the right moments. Then Leonard cleared his throat. "We've been reviewing long-term sustainability," he said. "Family assets, risk exposure." He turned to me. "Natalie, your income is a significant stabilizing factor." There it was, out in the open. "We think," Diane added, folding her napkin carefully, "it would be wise to formalize things." "Formalize what?" I asked. Evan answered for me. "Your support." Leonard slid a folder across the table. Inside were charts, projections, scenarios. They had modeled my money, not Evan's. Mine. "This protects everyone," Harold said, "including you." "How?" I asked. Leonard smiled thinly. "By ensuring clarity." I flipped through the pages slowly. A trust structure, monthly contributions, escalation clauses. 50,000 was the baseline. There was no cap. "You want me to sign this?" I said. "It's just a framework," Evan replied. "We'll review it together." I closed the folder. "No," I said. The word hung in the air. Diane's smile froze. Evan stiffened. "Natalie." "No," I repeated. "I'm not signing anything." Harold leaned back in his chair. "You're being emotional." Leonard gathered the folder slightly closer to himself, like he was reclaiming property. "This isn't personal," Leonard said. "It's prudent." "It's predatory," I replied. The table went silent. Evan's hand landed on my thigh under the table. His fingers dug in, warning. "We'll discuss this later," he said tightly. "No," I said again. "We're discussing it now." Harold's voice dropped. "You married into this family." I met his eyes. "I didn't marry into servitude." Diane gasped softly, like I'd slapped her. "You think too highly of yourself," she said. "Money changes women." I stood. "I'll see myself out," I said calmly. Evan stood too fast. His chair scraped loudly. "Natalie," he said low. "Sit down." I didn't. In the car, Evan didn't speak until we were halfway home. Then he exploded. "You humiliated us," he said, in front of Leonard. "I refused a contract," I replied. "That's not humiliation." He hit the steering wheel hard enough to make me flinch. "You don't get to decide that," he snapped. At home, the argument turned colder. He didn't yell. He paced. "You think you're smarter than everyone," he said. "You think because you make money, you're untouchable." "I think my consent matters," I said. He laughed, short, sharp. "You don't have consent in a marriage like this." That sentence changed something fundamental. I went to bed that night fully dressed, shoes still on, staring at the ceiling. Not afraid. Alert. The next morning, Evan apologized. He always did after pushing too far. "I was stressed," he said, making coffee. "They pressured me." "I know," I replied. That was true. He was pressured. He just chose to pass it on. At work that day, I requested a meeting with legal. Not about my marriage. About trusts. Asset protection. Editorial contracts often involve complex royalty structures. I asked questions framed around hypothetical authors. The answers applied just as well to me. That afternoon, Diane Whitman texted. "We were disappointed. Leonard says you overreacted. We expect the transfer as usual." I sent the money. But something was different. I didn't feel relief afterward. I felt resolve. That night, Evan slept soundly. I didn't. I lay awake calculating timelines, options, exposure. Not divorce. Not yet. Something else. Because the Whitmans had made a mistake. They thought bringing a professional into the room would intimidate me. They didn't understand my profession. I work with words for a living. I know how contracts are built. I know how power hides inside polite language. And now I knew exactly what they wanted from me. Permanent access. What they didn't know yet was that once terms are clear, negotiation becomes possible. And once negotiation fails, strategy begins. They had shown me the structure. Soon, I would show them the cost. But not yet. First, I needed them comfortable, confident, convinced that I was still manageable. So I smiled. I complied. I kept paying, and I waited. Because people who believe they own you always reveal their weakest point when they think the deal is done. And I was very close to letting them think that. Control doesn't announce itself all at once. It tightens gradually, like a belt you forget you're wearing until you can't breathe. After the dinner with Leonard Price, everything became quieter. Too quiet. Evan Whitman stopped arguing. He stopped pushing openly. He became attentive in a way that felt strategic. He brought me coffee in the mornings, asked about my day, told his parents I was overwhelmed and needed space. Diane Whitman sent a single text. "We trust you'll come around." Harold Whitman didn't text at all. That was how I knew they were regrouping. The money still left my account on the 1st of the month. $50,000, neat and predictable. Evan never thanked me. Gratitude would have implied choice. Instead, he started monitoring. He asked where I was going after work. He commented on how long meetings took. He questioned expenses that had never concerned him before. "Just trying to help," he said, every time. The first bruise happened on a Wednesday. Not a punch, not a slap. We were arguing quietly in the bedroom. I don't even remember about what. Probably timing. Probably money. It always came back to money. I turned to walk away. Evan grabbed my arm to stop me, harder than he meant to. Or harder than he claimed later. I pulled back. He didn't let go fast enough. The pain was sharp, then dull. He released me immediately, like he'd touched something hot. "Don't do that," he said. "You know I hate when you walk away." I looked at my arm. "No mark yet." "I didn't mean to," he added quickly. "You surprised me." That night, I stood in the bathroom and watched the bruise bloom. Purple first, then blue, then yellow at the edges. I wore long sleeves to work. No one asked. That's the thing about invisible damage. People only see what interrupts their comfort. Evan apologized again the next morning. He always apologized. "I'd never hurt you," he said, touching my shoulder carefully. "You know that." I nodded. But something inside me shifted. Not fear, Documentation. From that point on, I stopped relying on memory. I photographed the bruise, dated it, saved it to a cloud folder Evan didn't know existed. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't confront him. I observed. At work, I took on an additional project. A sensitive acquisition involving an author who was leaving another publisher under legal dispute. I worked closely with outside counsel. I listened more than I spoke. Legal language is revealing. It tells you how people think about risk. At home, Evan's behavior oscillated between indulgent and cold. When I complied, he was affectionate. When I questioned, he withdrew. No shouting, no threats. Just the removal of warmth. Diane Whitman called one evening while Evan was in the shower. "We need to talk," she said. "I'm busy," I replied. She laughed softly. "You always say that." There was a pause. "Leonard believes you're nervous because you don't understand the structure," she continued. "We can simplify it for you." "I understand it perfectly," I said. "That's what worries us," she replied. I hung up. That night, Evan asked why I was being difficult. "I'm not," I said. "I'm being careful." He studied me for a long moment. "You've changed," he said. "Yes," I replied. He smiled tightly. "Don't." I didn't respond. The next escalation came from Harold. He showed up at our apartment unannounced on a Saturday morning. Walked in like he owned the place. "We're concerned," he said, sitting down without invitation. "Your hesitation is unsettling." I stood across from him. "I'm not a line item," I said. He laughed. "Everything is a line item." Evan stood behind him, silent. That was when I understood something crucial. This wasn't a marriage problem. It was a system. Harold was the authority. Diane enforced the narrative. Evan was the intermediary, and I was the resource. Remove one part, and the system would adapt. Remove the resource, and it would collapse. That afternoon, I contacted a lawyer. Not one connected to work, not one connected to friends. A woman named Marissa Chen, recommended discreetly by a colleague who never asked questions. We met in her office downtown. Glass walls, neutral decor. I told her everything, slowly, precisely. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she folded her hands. "You're being financially coerced," she said, "and there's evidence of abuse." "I don't want to make a scene," I said. She nodded. "You don't have to." "What are my options?" I asked. She smiled slightly. "More than they think." She outlined them calmly. Separation of assets, protective orders, financial injunctions, documentation thresholds. I didn't commit to anything. I thanked her and left. On the walk home, my phone buzzed. "Evan, where are you?" I typed back. "Running late." That night, I sent the transfer as usual. I kissed Evan on the cheek. I said goodnight. I lay awake, listening to him breathe. Because now, I knew the rules. And once you understand the rules of a system designed to drain you, you don't try to fix it. You plan your exit, quietly, carefully, and with just enough patience to let the people who built it believe they're still in control. They weren't. They just didn't know it yet. And they wouldn't realize until the moment I stopped paying. That moment was coming, sooner than they thought. I learned how to look relaxed while planning an exit. It's a skill. One I didn't know I had until I needed it. After meeting Marissa Chen, I didn't rush. I didn't confront Evan Whitman. I didn't threaten Harold or Diane Whitman. I did what editors do when a manuscript is unstable. I read everything twice. At home, I became agreeable again. Not submissive, predictable. I asked Evan about his day. I listened when he complained about his job. I laughed at the right moments. I sent the transfer early one month instead of on the first. That detail mattered more than I expected. Evan noticed immediately. "They'll appreciate that," he said, relief softening his shoulders. "It shows commitment." Commitment. To what, he never said. Harold sent a short email the next morning. "Received. Thank you." No signature. Diane followed with a text about a charity luncheon she wanted me to attend with her the following weekend. She framed it as bonding. I recognized it as optics. "People like seeing us together," she wrote. I agreed. The luncheon took place at a hotel ballroom downtown. Crystal glasses, white tablecloths. Women who spoke in polished half-sentences about philanthropy that mostly benefited their own social standing. Diane introduced me repeatedly as Evan's wife. Not Natalie, not an editor, not anything I'd built myself. "She's very generous," Diane said to one woman, squeezing my arm lightly. Family-oriented. I smiled, held eye contact, said nothing. Later, in the restroom, I locked myself into a stall and waited until my breathing slowed. Not because I was overwhelmed, because I was collecting data. Diane's phone buzzed twice while she washed her hands. She didn't check it. I did, from the reflection in the mirror. Leonard Price. I made a note. That night, Evan was affectionate, almost tender. "You handled today well," he said. My mother was impressed. I thought about the bruise on my arm, now faded to yellow. "I'm glad," I replied. At work, things intensified. The author dispute escalated into arbitration. I sat in meetings with attorneys who dissected timelines, intent, leverage. I listened carefully to how power shifts when documentation is precise. One afternoon, during a break, the opposing counsel said something that stayed with me. "People lie less when they think the system is already watching." That sentence settled into place. At home, Evan started asking about my schedule more often. "Just curious," he'd say. "You've been busy." "I have," I replied. "Big quarter." He nodded, but his eyes lingered. That was when I realized the performance of peace had a shelf life. He could feel something changing, even if he couldn't name it. The next demand came wrapped as an opportunity. Harold invited us to dinner again. "Just family this time," he said. "No advisors." I knew better. Leonard Price was there when we arrived. So was a man I didn't recognize. Late 40s, crisp suit, confident posture. "This is Victor Ames," Harold said. "Our attorney." Victor Ames smiled at me, like I was a witness he planned to cross-examine gently. Dinner was efficient. Minimal small talk. Then Victor placed a single document on the table. "Just a signature," he said, "to clarify previous arrangements." I didn't touch it. Evan looked at me. His jaw was tight. "We discussed this," he said. "No," I replied calmly. "You presented it. I declined." Harold's voice hardened. "You're being unreasonable." "I'm being consistent," I said. Diane leaned forward. "After everything we've done for you?" I met her eyes. "List it." She blinked. Victor cleared his throat. "Perhaps emotions are high." "Perhaps," I said, "but I won't sign." Evan's hand found my knee again. Too tight. Too familiar. "Let's talk privately," he said through his teeth. "No," I said. "I'm comfortable here." That was the moment the room changed. Not explosively, coldly. Victor gathered the document. "We'll revisit this." Harold stood. "You're forgetting your place." I stood too. "No," I said. "I'm remembering it." The drive home was silent. At the apartment, Evan shut the door harder than necessary. "You embarrassed us," he said. "I protected myself," I replied. He laughed. Not humor, disbelief. "You think you have leverage," he said. "You don't." I looked at him. Really looked. "You're wrong," I said. He stepped closer. "Careful," he said. "You're pushing too far." I didn't move. "Let go of my arm," I said. He hadn't realized he was holding it. He released me slowly. That night, he slept on the couch. I slept in the bedroom with the door locked. The next morning, I called Marissa Chan. "It's time," I said. She didn't ask for details. "Good," she replied. "We'll move quickly." Within a week, she filed a motion for financial injunction. Temporary, quiet, efficient. Evan was served at work. He came home furious. "What did you do?" he demanded. "I asserted my rights," I said. "You can't cut off my parents," he said. "I didn't," I replied. "The court did." His face went pale. The injunction froze the transfers pending review. Harold called that night. Then Diane. Then Leonard. I didn't answer. Evan paced the apartment like an animal in a shrinking cage. "This will ruin us," he said. "No," I replied. "It will reveal us." He stared at me. "You planned this," he said. "Yes," I said. For the first time, I saw fear replace entitlement. He didn't touch me again. That mattered. The next few weeks were chaos outside and quiet inside. Legal notices, missed calls, voicemails that swung from pleading to threats. Marissa handled everything. "Let them exhaust themselves," she advised. "They're used to compliance, not resistance." One evening, as I reviewed documents alone in the apartment, I realized something startling. I wasn't scared. I was focused. The money was frozen. The system was destabilizing. And the people who thought they owned me were finally being forced to explain themselves to someone who didn't care about their status. That was only the beginning, because freezing the money was just step one. The real shift would come when the truth went public, and they still thought this was a private dispute. They were wrong, very wrong. The next chapter wouldn't be about defense. It would be about exposure. And once the narrative changed, there would be no going back to the performance of peace, only consequences. The first hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. No courtroom drama, no gallery, just a conference room with bad coffee and people who thought they were prepared. They weren't. Marissa Chen arrived early, calm as always. She set her folder on the table and nodded to me like this was any other meeting. That steadiness mattered. It reminded me that nothing happening now was impulsive. Across the table, Evan Whitman sat rigid, jaw clenched. Harold Whitman leaned back in his chair like he owned the building. Diane Whitman sat close to him, hand resting on his arm, eyes scanning the room for allies. Leonard Price was there. Victor Ames, too. They'd brought a team. Marissa brought facts. The mediator, a retired judge named Samuel Ortega, opened the session with procedural remarks. Neutral, efficient, unimpressed. "Ms. Brooks," he said, looking at me, "this injunction was granted based on claims of financial coercion and domestic abuse. We're here to determine whether it stands pending further action." Harold laughed under his breath. "This is absurd," he said. She volunteered to help. Marissa didn't respond immediately. She let the silence stretch. Then she slid a document across the table. "Here are the transfer records," she said. "Monthly payments of $50,000 for 14 consecutive months, originating solely from Ms. Brooks's personal account." Leonard Price leaned forward. "She's a high earner. There was no hardship." Marissa nodded. "Hardship isn't the standard. Coercion is." She looked at Judge Ortega. "We have documentation of threats, monitoring behavior, and physical restraint." Evan shifted in his chair. "That's not what happened," he said quickly. "It was an argument." Marissa handed over another folder. "Photographic evidence. Time-stamped. Medical records consistent with contusions." Diane's face tightened. "This is exaggerated," she said. "Natalie has always been dramatic." I didn't react. That was the first time they said my name, without expectation attached. Judge Ortega reviewed the photos carefully. "Mr. Whitman," he said to Evan, "did you place your hands on your wife during a dispute?" Evan hesitated. "I may have grabbed her arm," he said, "but it wasn't violent." The word "may" landed hard. Judge Ortega looked up. "Did she consent?" Evan didn't answer. The injunction stood just like that. No shouting. No verdict thunder. Just a quiet acknowledgement that something was wrong. Outside the building, Harold cornered me in the hallway. "You think this makes you powerful," he said, voice low. "It makes you dangerous." I met his eyes. "No," I replied. "It makes me done." Evan didn't speak to me on the drive home. At the apartment, he packed a bag without asking. "I'm staying with my parents," he said. "You've gone too far." I nodded. "That's your choice." He paused at the door. "You'll regret this." I looked at him evenly. I already regret staying. The door closed. The silence afterward was different, not tense, clear. That night, Diane Whitman sent me an email. "We can fix this if you stop embarrassing us." I forwarded it to Marissa. At work, I didn't tell anyone what was happening. I didn't need sympathy. I needed normalcy. Still, people noticed. "You look lighter," a colleague said during a meeting. "Like you slept." I had. For the first time in months, I slept without bracing for impact. Then came the letters. Harold's attorney sent one, accusing me of defamation. Diane's friend from a charity board sent a message implying my reputation would suffer. Leonard Price warned that my career could be affected if I was seen as unstable. Each threat followed the same pattern. Control, disguised as concern. Marissa responded to all of them. Concise, polite, unyielding. Cease contact. All communication through counsel. They hated that. 2 weeks later, Evan filed a motion to dissolve the injunction. His claim was simple. Marital funds. Mutual agreement. No abuse. Marissa countered with transcripts, messages, a timeline that showed escalation. Judge Ortega denied the motion. Evan lost something that day. Not legally. Psychologically. He stopped being confident. He started being careful. That was when the second phase began. Exposure doesn't happen all at once. It leaks. Harold Whitman's financial claims didn't hold up under scrutiny. The hardship narrative fell apart when Marissa subpoenaed records connected to Leonard Price's firm. Diane's charity activities were less charitable than advertised. None of it was criminal, but it was sloppy. And sloppy systems collapse under attention. The Whitmans had built their authority on the assumption that no one would ever look closely. They were wrong. One afternoon, I received a call from a reporter, local business section. She'd received an anonymous tip about questionable family trust arrangements involving coerced funds. "Would you be willing to comment?" she asked. "No," I said, "but my attorney will." Marissa took the call. The article ran 3 days later. No names in the headline, just questions. But people recognized the pattern. Phones started ringing. Invitations quietly disappeared. Harold stopped attending certain events. Diane withdrew from committees temporarily. Evan called me that night. "You did this," he said. "No," I replied. "I stopped protecting you." He exhaled shakily. "My parents are furious," he said. I said nothing. "They say you're trying to destroy the family." I finally spoke. "You destroyed it when you decided my body and money were yours to manage." He was silent. "I don't recognize you," he said. "That's because I'm not trying to be recognized," I replied. The divorce filing came the following week. I signed without hesitation. No contest. Clean separation. Marissa ensured my assets were protected. Evan didn't fight it. He couldn't afford to. That night, alone in the apartment, I opened my laptop and reviewed everything I'd documented. Every transfer, every message, every moment I'd swallowed discomfort to keep the peace. I closed the file. Peace isn't something you keep. It's something you reclaim. The Whitmans still thought this was about money. They were wrong. Money was just the leverage they understood. The real reckoning was coming. And it wouldn't involve me raising my voice. It would involve me telling the truth once. In the right place, to the right people, and letting their carefully maintained image do the rest of the work for me. The next chapter wouldn't be about survival. It would be about choosing exactly how visible I wanted to be. Because once silence stops working, clarity takes its place. And clarity doesn't negotiate. I didn't plan to become visible. Visibility happened to me the way weather does. Gradually, inevitably. And once it starts, you can't pretend you're not standing in it. The article didn't name me, but it didn't have to. Chicago's publishing and finance circles are smaller than they like to admit. Patterns get recognized. Whispers move faster than facts. By the end of that week, 3 people I hadn't spoken to in years had reached out. All with the same careful phrasing. "I hope you're doing okay." No one asked what happened. Everyone sensed that something had. At work, my managing director, Thomas Reed, asked if I had time for coffee. He didn't frame it as concern. He framed it as courtesy. "I want you to hear this from me first," he said once we were seated. "There's noise, nothing formal, nothing actionable. But I want to know if there's anything we should be prepared for." I appreciated that he asked, instead of assumed. "I'm in the middle of a divorce," I said. "There's an injunction related to financial coercion. My attorney is handling it." He nodded slowly. "Is there risk to the firm?" "No," I said. "There's risk to people who confuse access with entitlement." That earned a small smile. "Then we're fine," he said. "Your work speaks for itself." That was the moment I realized how much of my fear had been borrowed, projected, fed to me by people who needed me compliant. The system outside my marriage was sturdier than the one inside it had ever been. Evan Whitman didn't take that well. He showed up at the apartment one evening unannounced. I hadn't changed the locks yet. That was my mistake. He stood in the doorway, eyes sunken, posture unfamiliar. "You're enjoying this," he said. I didn't invite him in. "No," I replied. "I'm enduring it." "You could stop," he said. "All of this. Just tell them you exaggerated." I crossed my arms. "That would be lying," he scoffed. "You've always been good with words. That's why I don't waste them anymore." He stepped closer. "My parents are under attack. You know that." "They're under scrutiny," I corrected. "There's a difference." He shook his head. "You think this makes you strong." "It makes me honest," I said. Strong came later. For a moment, I thought he might push past me. Instead, he laughed. Soft. Broken. "You always needed an audience," he said. "This is just another performance." I held his gaze. "No," I said. "This is what happens when the audience finally sees the script." He left without another word. That night, I changed the locks. The next escalation didn't come from Evan. It came from Diane Whitman. She sent a handwritten letter. Real stationery. Heavy paper. The kind meant to signal sincerity. Natalie, I don't recognize the woman you've become. This path you're on is destructive. Families handle things privately. We could have resolved this quietly if you hadn't involved outsiders. I raised my son to expect loyalty. I hope you reconsider before more damage is done. Diane, I read it once. Then I placed it in the folder with everything else. I didn't reply because I understood something now. They didn't want reconciliation. They wanted containment. The family meeting came 2 weeks later. Not court-ordered. Not requested by my attorney. Harold Whitman invited me through Victor Ames. Neutral setting. Mediation tone. They want to settle, Marissa said when she forwarded me the email. On their terms. I agreed to attend, not because I needed closure, because I wanted to see what they would offer when they realized they couldn't intimidate me anymore. The meeting took place in a private conference room at Victor's firm. Harold sat at the head of the table, Diane beside him, Evan across from me. Victor spoke first. This situation has escalated beyond anyone's intention, he said. We'd like to propose a resolution that avoids further reputational harm. Harold leaned forward. You stop speaking, he said bluntly. We stop pushing. I didn't react. Evan added, we'll waive any claim to future contributions, as if generosity were theirs to grant. Diane clasped her hands. We're willing to forgive, she said. I let the silence stretch. Victor cleared his throat. In exchange, you withdraw all complaints and agree to a confidentiality clause. Marissa leaned in slightly. That would require my client to lie. Harold frowned. No. It requires discretion. I finally spoke. You want silence, I said. I want distance. That's the same thing, Diane said. No, I replied. Silence protects you. Distance protects me. Evan looked at me then. Really looked. You don't have to destroy us, he said. I met his eyes. I'm not destroying you, I said. I'm declining to carry you anymore. Harold slammed his hand on the table. You owe us, he said. After everything. Marissa didn't flinch. My client owes you nothing, she said, and any further contact will be addressed legally. The meeting ended abruptly. No agreement. No handshake. As we walked out, Diane hissed under her breath. You'll regret this when everyone knows who you really are. I stopped. I turned to her calmly. They already do, I said. Outside, Marissa exhaled. They're unraveling, she said. This is where people make mistakes. I know, I replied. That's why I'm done talking. The mistake came faster than expected. 2 days later, Harold Whitman gave an interview. Not directly about me, about family values, about being betrayed by those you trust, about generosity being punished. He thought he was controlling the narrative. But narratives aren't owned by the loudest voice. They're shaped by evidence. The comment section was not kind. People noticed inconsistencies, asked questions, shared links. The journalist followed up. This time, names were mentioned. Marissa issued a statement. Facts, dates, no adjectives. The story spread. Not viral. Worse. Credible. Harold's business relationships cooled. Diane resigned from 2 boards. Leonard Price quietly stepped back from advising them. Evan stopped calling. I felt no triumph, only relief. Because this wasn't revenge the way people imagine it. It wasn't dramatic. It was procedural. It was choosing not to lie anymore. And once you stop lying to protect people who harm you, they're left alone with their own behavior. That's the part no one warns them about. In the quiet after the noise, I realized something else. I wasn't angry. I was finished. And being finished is more powerful than being furious. The next chapter wouldn't be about them at all. It would be about what happens after you remove a system of control from your life and realize there's nothing underneath it holding you down, just space. And the question of what you choose to build in it next. The strangest part wasn't the fallout. It was the quiet that followed it. Once Harold Whitman stopped calling, once Diane Whitman stopped writing, once Evan Whitman disappeared into whatever version of denial he needed to survive, my days opened up in ways I hadn't anticipated. Not dramatically, subtly. I woke up without bracing for messages. I checked my bank account without tension. I chose close without imagining commentary. That absence was louder than any argument we'd ever had. At work, the arbitration wrapped up. The author signed. The book moved forward. My team celebrated with champagne and paper cups, laughing about deadlines and cover art. No one mentioned my divorce. That was a gift. I started leaving the office earlier. Not because I was less committed, but because I no longer needed to prove my worth through exhaustion. On one of those early evenings, I walked along the river after work. I hadn't done that in years. There had always been somewhere to rush back to, someone waiting to be managed. The city moved around me, uninterested, indifferent, free. I sat on a bench and realized how much of my identity had been shaped by defense, by anticipating reactions, by minimizing myself to avoid escalation. Without that, I had to relearn how to occupy space. Marissa Chen checked in once a week. "Everything holding?" she asked during one call. "Yes," I said. "They're quiet." She paused. "That's good. And dangerous." "I know," I replied. "I'm not relaxing. I'm resetting." She smiled audibly. That's the right word. The divorce paperwork progressed smoothly. Evan didn't contest asset division. He didn't fight for the apartment. He didn't ask for anything. It was the most honest thing he'd done our entire marriage. One afternoon, as I was packing my personal items from the apartment, I found a stack of old notebooks in a drawer. Notes from early in my career, marginalia from manuscripts, thoughts about language, structure, truth. I flipped through them slowly, before Evan, before the Whitmans, before my money became communal property. I had been sharp, curious, unafraid. I kept the notebooks. The apartment itself felt different once Evan's presence was gone. Quieter, but also hollow, like a space that had absorbed too much tension to ever fully release it. I decided not to renew the lease, not as an act of defiance, as an act of honesty. I found a smaller place on the north side. 1 bedroom, large windows, no room for anyone else's expectations. The day I moved, I didn't tell anyone from my old life. I didn't need witnesses. The first night there, I cooked dinner and ate it standing by the counter, because I could, because no one was watching. That mattered more than comfort. A week later, Thomas Reed asked me into his office again. "I have an opportunity," he said, "if you're interested." I listened. A new imprint, more autonomy, more risk, less visibility. Something I would have declined a year earlier, because it didn't fit the version of success I thought I was supposed to want. "What's the catch?" I asked. "You'll be building from scratch," he said. "You won't be able to hide behind existing systems." I smiled. I'm not interested in hiding. I accepted. That decision felt like a line drawn forward instead of backward. My parents called once during that period. They'd heard things, concerned things, questions shaped like warnings. I kept the conversation brief. "I'm safe," I said. "I'm well. I don't need advice." They didn't push. That surprised me. I realized then that not everyone would fight to keep me small. Some people simply followed the rules they were given until someone changed them. I wasn't interested in educating anyone. I was interested in living. One evening, as I unpacked the last box, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was Evan. I didn't open it right away. I set the phone down, finished unpacking, made tea. Then I read it. "I didn't think you'd go this far. I thought you'd cool off." I stared at the words. This was the closest he'd come to admitting he'd underestimated me. I typed back one sentence. "This isn't far. This is free." He didn't reply. I blocked the number. That felt final. Weeks passed. Then months. The story faded from public conversation. New scandals replaced it. New narratives demanded attention. That was how I wanted it. I wasn't interested in being remembered as a cautionary tale or a symbol. I wanted to be unremarkable again, but changed. One afternoon, a junior editor on my new team stopped by my office. "Can I ask you something?" she said, hesitating. "Of course," I replied. "How do you know when to stop trying to fix something?" she asked, and just walk away. I considered that. "You stop when fixing it requires you to become someone you don't recognize," I said. "Walking away isn't quitting. It's choosing not to disappear." She nodded slowly. "Thank you," she said. After she left, I sat for a long moment. This was the part no one talks about. After the exposure, after the legal moves, after the system collapses. What remains is choice, not reactive choice, intentional choice. And I was only just beginning to understand what I wanted to choose. Because the next chapter wouldn't bring confrontation or headlines. It would bring something quieter. A final attempt at control from the one person who still believed he could rewrite the ending. And this time, I wouldn't respond with strategy. I would respond with absence. And that, I knew, would be the most decisive move of all. The attempt came disguised as reconciliation. It always does. I was leaving the office late one Thursday when the security guard stopped me. He looked apologetic, like he didn't want to be the messenger. "There's someone asking for you," he said. "Says it's important." I already knew. Evan Whitman was standing near the elevators, hands in his pockets, posture carefully neutral. He looked thinner, less certain, like someone who'd been waiting for instructions that never came. "You shouldn't be here," I said calmly. "I just want to talk," he replied. 5 minutes. I checked the time. Not because I intended to stay, because I wanted to be deliberate. 2, I said. We walked outside. The city noise swallowed whatever drama he'd imagined. "I heard you moved," he said. "Yes. You didn't tell anyone. That was the point." He nodded, like he was filing that away. "My parents are struggling." I didn't respond. "Harold had to refinance," he continued. Diane stepped down from another board. Still, nothing from me. "They're under a lot of stress," he added. "It's affecting their health." I looked at him then. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. He hesitated. "I thought you'd want to know." "No," I said. "You thought it would make me feel responsible." His jaw tightened. "They're still family," he said. "So was I replied. The silence stretched. "I never wanted it to go this far," he said finally. "That's not true," I said. "You wanted control. You just didn't want consequences." He flinched. "I loved you," he said. "I considered that. Not to debate it, to measure it." "You loved what I provided," I said. "Those aren't the same thing." He shook his head. "You're rewriting everything." "No," I said. I stopped editing the lie. He exhaled sharply. "You sound so certain." "I am," I replied. Another pause. "My mother wants to meet," he said. "Just the two of you. She thinks there's been a misunderstanding." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was familiar. "She thinks," I said slowly, "that if she gets me alone, she can reframe the story." "That's not fair," he said. "It's accurate." He stepped closer. "You don't have to punish everyone because things went wrong between us." "I'm not punishing anyone," I said. "I'm opting out." He stared at me, frustration edging into desperation. "You can't just disappear," he said. "People don't do that." "They do," I replied. "They just usually don't tell you." I turned to leave. "Wait," he said quickly. "There's something else." I stopped, without turning back. "My father is considering legal action," he said, "if this keeps escalating." I finally faced him. "On what grounds?" I asked. He hesitated. "Defamation, loss of opportunity." I nodded. "Then tell him to proceed through counsel." He searched my face, like he was looking for fear. He didn't find it. "You're really done," he said. "Yes," I replied. He swallowed. "You don't feel anything?" I answered honestly. "I feel clear." That was when he lost his composure. "You think you're better than us now," he snapped. "You think money and lawyers make you untouchable." "No," I said. "I think boundaries make me unreachable." He laughed bitterly. "You'll be alone." I considered that too. "I already was," I said. "I just stopped pretending." I walked away. He didn't follow. That was the last time I saw him in person. 2 weeks later, Harold Whitman's attorney sent a letter. Formal, threatening, poorly argued. Marissa responded within 24 hours. The threat evaporated. Not with drama, with silence. At work, I was deep into building the new imprint. Hiring, strategy, long-term planning. The kind of work that rewards patience. One afternoon, while reviewing submissions, I realized something unexpected. I was enjoying myself. Not relief, not recovery, enjoyment. That felt new. I started saying no more often. To projects that didn't fit, to meetings that didn't matter, to people who confused access with importance. Nothing bad happened. That was the lesson. My phone rang one evening while I was cooking dinner. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. It was Diane Whitman. Her voice was thinner than I remembered. "Natalie," she said carefully. I don't know if you'll hear this, but I wanted you to know. Things are different now. I deleted the message halfway through, not out of anger, out of certainty. Some conversations only exist to reopen doors you've already closed. I didn't owe her another entrance. A month later, the divorce was finalized. No ceremony, no confrontation, just signatures and a judge who didn't need details. I walked out of the courthouse alone, sunlight sharp on the steps. I stood there for a moment, not because I was overwhelmed, because I wanted to mark it. The end of a system, the end of a role, the end of being managed. That night, I sat in my new apartment and opened one of my old notebooks. On a blank page, I wrote a single sentence. I am no longer available for extraction. I closed the notebook. The hardest part was over. What remained wasn't revenge. It was something quieter. A life without constant negotiation, without fear, disguised as obligation. Without people who needed me smaller to feel larger. The next chapter wouldn't bring conflict. It would bring resolution. Not the kind that comes from apologies or forgiveness. The kind that comes from choosing yourself so completely that no one else gets a vote anymore. And once you reach that point, there's nothing left to prove. Only something left to live. Freedom has a way of asking questions you can't avoid. Once the divorce was finalized and the noise settled, I thought the hardest part was behind me. I was wrong. The hardest part wasn't surviving the Whitmans. It was learning how to live without reacting to them. For years, my decisions had been shaped by resistance. What would trigger Evan? What would calm Harold? What would satisfy Diane? Even my silence had been strategic. Now, there was no opponent, which meant there were no excuses left. The new imprint moved faster than expected. Within 3 months, we acquired 4 titles. One became a quiet bestseller. Nothing flashy, just solid work that spoke for itself. Thomas Reed stopped by my office one afternoon. "You're building something real here," he said. "Have you thought about equity?" I hadn't. That surprised me. We talked numbers, percentages, long-term projections, ownership instead of salary. It was the first time someone discussed my future without assuming it belonged to someone else. I went home that night and opened my financial records, not because I was anxious, because I was curious. I laid everything out: income, assets, losses, the 14 transfers, $700,000. Gone. Seeing the number in isolation felt strange, not painful, final. I didn't spiral. I closed the spreadsheet and wrote one line at the bottom: tuition paid. That reframing mattered. The money hadn't been wasted. It had purchased clarity. It had exposed a system I would have otherwise spent decades inside. That was expensive, but it wasn't a loss. A week later, Marissa called. "There's one loose end," she said. I knew what she meant. "The Whitmans are restructuring," she continued. "They're dissolving a family trust. Your name appears in correspondence as a contributor." My stomach tightened slightly. "What does that mean?" I asked. "They want to distance themselves," she said. "But distance leaves records. There may be tax implications. For them, not you." I smiled faintly. "Do I need to do anything?" "No," she said. "Unless you want to." I thought about that. "What would wanting to look like?" I asked. Marissa paused. "You could submit an affidavit clarifying the nature of the transfers." Silence stretched between us. "What happens if I do?" I asked. "It becomes part of the official record," she said. "Permanent, neutral, factual. No emotion, no accusation, just truth, archived." "Do it," I said. The affidavit took 20 minutes to draft. No adjectives, no speculation, just dates, amounts, and context. I signed it electronically and moved on with my day. 3 weeks later, Diane Whitman resigned from her last board position. No announcement, just an update on a website. Harold's name disappeared from a conference agenda. Leonard Price rebranded his firm. None of it dramatic enough to trend, just enough to sting. That was the balance sheet they hadn't anticipated. At work, one of my junior editors, Miguel Torres, asked if I'd consider mentoring him more formally. "I like how you make decisions," he said. "You don't rush, but you don't hesitate either." I agreed. Teaching him how to evaluate manuscripts felt different now, less defensive, more generous. One evening, after a long day, I sat in my apartment with the windows open, City noise drifting in. I thought about the woman I'd been when I married Evan Whitman. Smart, capable, still hungry for approval. I didn't judge her. She'd done the best she could with the information she had. The difference now was simple. I trusted myself. That trust showed up everywhere. In how I spoke, how I negotiated, how I walked into rooms without shrinking. I wasn't loud. I was solid. My phone buzzed with a notification from my bank. Dividend deposited. I smiled. Not because of the money, because of what it represented. Growth without extraction. A month later, my mother-in-law tried one last, indirect approach. A mutual acquaintance mentioned she'd been asking about me. Concerned, regretful. I nodded politely and changed the subject. I wasn't cruel. I was unavailable. That distinction saved me. On a quiet Sunday morning, I sat at my kitchen table with coffee and my notebook. I wrote down the things I would never negotiate again. My body, my money, my silence. I didn't need to frame it as revenge. Revenge implies attachment. This was detachment. And detachment, I realized, is the cleanest form of justice, because it leaves nothing for the other side to argue with. The chapter I was living now didn't need witnesses or validation. It didn't need an audience. It just needed consistency. The final piece would arrive soon. Not from them. From me. A decision that would close the last internal door I'd left cracked open out of habit. And once that door closed, there would be no echo. Just forward motion. Quiet. Unstoppable. The last door didn't announce itself. There was no dramatic knock, no ultimatum, no sudden event demanding resolution. It showed up as a thought I kept postponing. What would happen if I stopped defining this chapter of my life by what I escaped? That question followed me for days. At the office, on the train, while cooking. It wasn't urgent, but it was persistent. I realized I was still orienting myself away from something instead of towards something. That mattered. The imprint reached its first-year milestone ahead of schedule. 2 titles exceeded projections. One was optioned quietly for adaptation. Nothing public yet, just contracts and conversations. Thomas Reed sent a brief note. Well done. Let's talk long-term. Long-term used to scare me. It implied permanence, and permanence had once meant entrapment. Now it felt different. I met him the following week. We discussed equity again, governance, decision-making authority, exit clauses. Clauses mattered to me now. I want veto power over any partnership that compromises editorial independence, I said. Thomas nodded without hesitation. Reasonable. That word landed gently. Reasonable. Not demanding, not difficult, not emotional, just reasonable. At home, my life had settled into patterns I'd chosen. Morning walks, evening reading, dinner at the counter. Music on while I worked through manuscripts. No one commented on my schedule. No one monitored my tone. That freedom was quiet, but it was total. Marissa called one afternoon with an update I didn't expect. Harold Whitman's attorney reached out, she said. Not aggressively. I felt a flicker of irritation. Then it passed. What do they want? I asked. A statement, she said. They're restructuring, again. They want confirmation that you're not pursuing further action. I almost laughed. I'm not, I said. I never was. That's what I told them, Marissa replied. But they asked if you'd be willing to sign something to that effect. I thought about it. Signing would be easy. Harmless, even. But it would also reopen a channel I had deliberately closed. No, I said finally. Silence is already my answer. Marissa didn't push. That's consistent. After the call, I sat for a while, letting the feeling settle. This was the moment I'd been circling. The temptation to clarify, to reassure, to manage their discomfort one last time. I didn't take it. That was the choice. Not dramatic, not punitive, just closed. A week later, Evan's name surfaced unexpectedly. A colleague mentioned him casually, not knowing the connection. He'd changed jobs, moved states, started consulting. He seems different, she said. Quieter. I nodded, neutral. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt distance. That was enough. On a Friday evening, I attended a small industry gathering, not a networking event, just dinner. Editors, agents, People who spoke candidly because there was no power to perform for. Someone asked me how I handled conflict so calmly. I considered the question. I stopped thinking of conflict as something to win, I said. It's just information. They nodded, thoughtful. That answer surprised me too. Later that night, walking home, I realized something important. I hadn't checked my phone all evening, not once. No scanning for messages, no bracing for tone. I was present. That presence was the real victory. The notebook came out again that weekend. I didn't write about the Whitmans. I wrote about what I wanted to build next. Stories that challenged control disguised as care. Voices that didn't apologize for clarity. I outlined an editorial vision that felt unmistakably mine, not reactive, rooted. On the last page, I wrote another sentence. I don't need closure from people who benefited from my confusion. I closed the notebook. The final chapter of this story wouldn't end with confrontation or reconciliation. It would end with something simpler. Proof. Proof that life continues, that it grows, that it expands when you stop shrinking yourself to fit other people's expectations. The last thing left was to say it out loud, not to them, to you. And once I did, there would be nothing left unresolved, just a life, fully claimed. And that was more than enough. I didn't announce the end of anything. I let it end. That's what people don't understand about walking away cleanly. There's no closing speech, no victory lap, no moment where everyone finally agrees you were right. There's just a morning where you wake up and realize you're no longer carrying a weight you once thought was permanent. That morning came quietly. I was standing in my kitchen, coffee cooling on the counter, sunlight cutting across the floor in a way that felt deliberate, earned. I wasn't thinking about Evan Whitman, or Harold and Diane Whitman, or court filings, or transfers, or damage control. I was thinking about a manuscript deadline. That's how I knew it was over. The imprint officially launched its second list that week. Strong titles, clear vision. The kind of work that doesn't need hype because it knows where it's going. Thomas Reed finalized the equity agreement. My name appeared in documents not as a contributor or a supporter, but as an owner. Ownership changes how you stand in a room. You don't rush. You don't shrink. You don't explain why you deserve space. You just take it. One afternoon, as I was reviewing edits, a junior editor asked me how I learned to set boundaries so firmly. I answered honestly. I learned the cost of not having them. She nodded, like that was enough. It was. I still get occasional echoes from that old life. A name mentioned in passing. A rumor that reaches me secondhand. Someone asking, carefully, if things ever resolved. I don't correct them. Resolution isn't something you receive. It's something you stop waiting for. The money is back where it belongs. Growing, working quietly, not feeding anyone else's illusion of entitlement. My body feels like mine again. My time does too. I don't flinch when my phone rings. I don't rehearse conversations in my head. I don't anticipate disapproval before making decisions. That constant vigilance is gone, and in its place is something steady. Trust, not in other people, in myself. I kept the notebooks. I kept the lessons. I kept the part of me that noticed something was wrong long before I had the language to explain it. I didn't keep the marriage. I didn't keep the role. I didn't keep the silence. And I didn't keep trying to make people comfortable at my own expense. That's the part they never tell you about revenge. The real kind isn't loud. It doesn't require humiliation or destruction. It's building a life so intact that the people who tried to break you no longer have access to it. They don't get updates. They don't get explanations. They don't get a final word. They just get absence. And absence, when it's intentional, is devastating in a way no argument ever is. If you've listened this far and recognized something familiar in my story, I want you to know this. You're not imagining it. You're not overreacting. And you don't owe anyone continued access to your money, your body, your time, or your silence. You don't need to burn bridges. You just need to stop crossing them for people who wouldn't meet you halfway. If this story resonated with you, let me know in the comments. I read them. And if you want more real-life stories about family drama, betrayal, revenge, and what happens when the tables finally turn, like and subscribe. Not because I need validation, but because stories like this remind people that walking away isn't weakness. It's clarity. And clarity, once claimed, cannot be taken from you again.